It's so stressful for reporters, Chris. I wish
Yeah.
everybody out there in the UFO community who's listening would understand that even if you get wind of a story coming out, it's so unhelpful for that to be leaked on Twitter. I consider this to be as important as the 2017 story in terms of the David Grusch story. I think it's just as significant and just as much of a turning point. It's just meeting with more resistance because it's asking a lot more of people to accept that there could be these programs with crash retrieved objects.
Welcome to Lato Files. I have a very exciting guest today. I've actually talked to this guest over a year ago. She was one of my first big time guests. Leslie Kean is the author of these amazing books. I've read both of these books, UFOs, Generals, Pilots, and Government Officials Go on the Record. I think that's a great intro book to really get an amazing idea of the breadth of all the cases. And then when I was ready for it, basically a year later, was her most recent book is Surviving Death. A journalist investigates evidence for an afterlife. Could there be actual life after death? And could it change your ideas? Both of these books, I have a little bit of an ontological shock from them. So very happy now to talk to the author herself. Chris Lato, welcome to Lato Files.
Hi, Chris.
Hello, Leslie. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be back on with you.
A lot has happened, I guess, over a year and a half now after we talked last.
A lot has happened. Yeah. It's not like the old days anymore.
Let's just get right into it. We have your two books here. I did want to ask one question about the cover. You know, I love asking authors because I know I've written books in the past, how much an author spends on their actual book cover and the title and everything. I noticed here you had how you positioned actually UFOs here to get an impression of interviews. And then you also had a foreword by John Podesta. What is your take on John Podesta and how did he, I guess, affect your book cover?
Well, I mean, I got to know John back starting in about 2000 when I was involved with a lawsuit against NASA, a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit that went on for years and years. And he was a supporter of that because he believes in the people's right to information. You know, he's very much of an open government person. And he's also loves the issue of UFOs. He was famous for being an X-Files fan when he was in the White House. So that's how it all happened. I mean, I used to go and have meetings with him and let him know what was going on with this NASA lawsuit. And I just asked him to write the foreword to my book and he agreed to do it. And I think it did help the book a lot. I mean, the book was contributed to by so many other people, as you know, from having read it. There are maybe 10 or 12, 13 chapters written by other people. And of course, John Podesta wrote the foreword, but there's generals that have written chapters in the book. So people get to hear from them in their own words rather than me just quoting people. I thought it was really interesting to have like Parviz Jafari, who tried to shoot down a UFO over Iran, to describe his story himself. You know, so I just invited them all to write chapters. Part of what makes the book so interesting is these contributions from other people. Or a lot of what makes it interesting is that, actually.
You were approached to write the original 2017 article, you know, the famous Black Auras article. It must have something to do with this book, I'm guessing, right? Had they read the book? Did they follow your work?
Well, I think what happened, I mean, the book helped sort of get me more credibility in this world. You know, it kind of elevated my standing, I think, or something like that. And the people who invited me to this meeting, I know they really liked the book and respected the work I did. And so I think it was 10 years prior that the book came out, but that book helped connect me with people, the kinds of people that were at that meeting, like Hal Puthoff. And then later on, I got to know Christopher Mellon. And I think it was because of the level of reporting that I was doing, they respected it. And so, yeah, it definitely did help sort of open doors for me to connect with people who normally are not that public, but who have a lot of interesting information, who have clearances, and who are willing to talk off the record to me. So that's, yeah, it definitely helped in that journey.
Your 2010 book, UFOs, delved into some of the most credible cases like Rendlesham Forest, Phoenix Lights. Are there any lesser known cases you investigated or maybe you found out about afterwards that deserve more attention?
It's a good question. I'd have to think about that. I mean, I'm always, talking to witnesses of various events and stuff like that. I can't always write stories about them for a lot of different reasons. The next big cases were the Nimitz case, which we covered in the New York Times, and then the Ryan Graves events, which we covered in 2019. There was the Stephenville case actually was something that was really important. Yeah, and that happened around the time that I was actually writing the book. So because I wasn't a deadline, I didn't have time to really look into that case, but that was a really important one. It's pretty well known. So in terms of lesser known cases, I have files of cases and people I've talked to, but I can't think of anything off the top of my head.
I think that's a great one, the Stephenville. I made a video about that one. It has a supermarket-sized UFO. I know that there was radar data that they launched F-16s, I guess 12 F-16s, and there was supposed radar data of this object moving very fast. You bring that one up, but yeah, that one really hasn't, I wouldn't say gone mainstream, I guess. I don't know.
I know. I mean, I never covered it, except I did help produce a series. I don't know if you're aware of this, but it's a series called UFOs Investigating the Unknown that was originally made for CNN. We made it basically in 21, 22. It just aired in January of 23 initially, or maybe a few months after that, but it's brand new. And in that series, which I helped produce with Breakthrough Films, an independent film company, we covered the Stephenville case extensively. In fact, there were 5 episodes in that series, and one of them featured that case as the main storyline through is episode 2. And I think we got something new on that case. And I don't know if I should give it away because it's so much fun to watch it.
Where can we find it? I think a few months ago I went to watch that series and I couldn't easily find it. I live in Europe though. It's not so easy to watch things on Hulu, etc.
That's the problem. But now it's on Disney Plus.
Okay,
so Disney,
excellent.
Yeah, you can access anywhere in the world, as I understand it, as long as you subscribe. But originally it was on Hulu, and it's true. It was really frustrating to me that it wasn't available. People all over the world, they were writing me, how can I see this? So I'm really happy that it's now on Disney Plus. And yeah, I think it's just really cool the way what they discovered, this film company, when they were dealing with that case. We got this witness who was very critical of the whole case. She was the head editor at the newspaper where Angela Joyner worked, who was this journalist who was covering the case. And she became very well known for it. And she has since died. She had COVID, but this head editor was really negative about it. I'm not going to give it away because something happened to her, which completely changed her perception of what happened in that event. And that was just really fun to capture on camera. So.
Okay, yeah. Don't give it away. Actually, I would like to see that. And that is good news. I do remember I tried to watch it. So check that out on Disney Plus. So what we have here, intelligence officials say U.S. has retrieved craft of non-human origin. Make this bigger here. So that was in the debrief. So Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal, the same authors. You had one more, Helena Cooper, right? She was on the initial 2017.
Right. She worked with us extensively. I mean, she was really our essential reporter in the first story because she's on staff at the New York Times. She's their Pentagon correspondent. I mean, that's a really important position for somebody to have at the New York Times. And when we brought the story to the New York Times, Ralph and I, she was assigned to work with us. So that was an incredible gift. I mean, we could never pull this off without Helene. And then she also wrote the second story with us, which was in 2019, the story about Ryan Graves and the sightings that people in his universe were having off the East Coast of the United States in 2014, 2015. And after that, Ralph and I did a series of stories on our own, and same with the debrief. But Helene was absolutely amazing to work with. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. But are you working with her now, or do you think you would work with her?
Not working with her now. I mean, if we had the opportunity to work with her again, I would be thrilled. But it just depends. Ralph and I are both freelancers, so we have to, if we want to do a story, we have to get the editors at the New York Times interested in it. And then if they are, then the question becomes, do we work with Helene or not? It depends, I think, on the nature of the story. I think for our later stories, they didn't feel she really needed to participate, and they have her assigned to so many different things. She's traveling all over the world, covering the military and in the Middle East and all kinds of places. So I don't think they want to let her go on into the UFO world unless they have to,
Yeah.
But for those first two stories, I think it was really important that she be with us. And yeah, so I don't know if it'll ever happen again. I can't say.
Excellent. And then yeah, an amazing scoop, right? You mentioned there you talked to the initial 2017, and then I didn't even realize the Ryan Graves story. Again, that was yours as well. And then now you have the Grush case. Amazing work each time. How do you know? How did you know? Because I'm sure you get so many leads or so many contacts. How did you know it was such a scoop? I guess. How did it all begin with Grush, and how did you know?
Well, I had some other sources or colleagues who knew him, and they had known him for a while. And the idea was that he did want to come forward and he wanted it to be in a very reputable format. And so he agreed for Ralph and I to be the journalists that would bring him forward. He wanted to come forward for all the reasons that he stated in the story. Chris Mellon, for instance, was one of them, one person who introduced me to Dave Grusch. And a couple of months before, I guess I first met him, I believe in March, before he left his job at the NGA, the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. And he didn't want to come out until after he had left the agency. He was planning to leave anyway. He left on April 7th, and that's when we increased our conversations. And, I spent a lot of time with him. He sent us a lot of documentation, and the story came out in June. So yeah, but how it all started was because Chris Mellon and others who knew him introduced me to him, and they gave me a lot of background on him even before I met him.
I remember I don't know if it's controversy or not, but that it wasn't released in like the New York Times, that it was released in the Debrief, a smaller publication. When we talked initially, it was very difficult for you to get anything published back in 2000, anything UFO related. And so now it seems like it has changed, but even then there's still some stigma related to going into the Times.
Yeah, I mean, I think the issue, and again, we did offer the story to the Times, and they passed on it, and they never tell you why. But I think a topic like this, crash retrieved objects, when there's no proof or evidence being offered, it's just that this individual has talked to a lot of other people. It just wasn't the kind of thing that the Times felt comfortable with. I'm assuming that's the case. That was the case with the Washington Post, and I think they're probably very similar in terms of how they look at this. So Ralph and I worked with the Washington Post for quite a while, and the reporter there, Shane Harris, who recently did an interview about this topic, was very interested in it and did a lot of investigation himself, but he didn't feel like it really rose to the standard of the Washington Post. That's how he described it. And I think for those media, the problem is that there's no quotes proof or at least any kind of hard evidence or documentation of what Grusch is talking about. I still consider Grusch to be very credible, and I consider this to be a huge story. So it's just the different media have their different standards and different ways of going about things. We got to the point where we were just frustrated waiting around for these media to get comfortable. Also, the story started to leak. It's so stressful for reporters, Chris. I wish
Yeah.
everybody out there in the UFO community who's listening would understand that even if you get wind of a story coming out, it's so unhelpful for that to be leaked on Twitter. It just makes it so stressful for the reporters because you don't know if someone else is going to try to go after the story and maybe do an inferior job and get it first, but not do the right kind of job. You don't know if people are going to come after the sources that you're working with. I mean, it's just so unhelpful. But, that was happening. It always does eventually. And so we felt a lot of pressure to get the story out quickly. The Debrief is an amazing publication to work with. I mean, the editors there are fantastic. Micah Hanks was our main editor, and they worked with us very, very diligently, and we were able to turn the story around with them very quickly. So I'm proud to have brought it out there. And that story got almost 3 million hits. It got 2.7 views, or I think that was the number, in just the first week that it was up.
Wow.
So it certainly was well read. I don't know if it would have been any more well read if it was in the Times or the Washington Post. I really don't know how much that mattered. I mean, it has obviously a certain elevated respectable kind of aura to it when it's in those newspapers. And obviously we would have loved to have been in either one of them. But I also think the word got out very well in the debrief, and I think it's a wonderful publication, and I look forward to working with them more in the future.
Yeah, it certainly made waves all around the world. It definitely made a huge splash either way. How have you felt with the whole Grusch release? Do you think it's gone well? What do you think about them going into his background, or are you happy with how everything's come about with David Grusch in general?
Yeah, I think it's gone well. I think the fact that he was able to testify before Congress is unbelievable when you think about they were sitting there asking him questions about crash retrievals under sworn testimony before Congress. That is just a stunning development, irrespective of the specifics of maybe what should or shouldn't have been discussed. I mean, I just think in looking at the bigger picture, it's just an amazing development. And I was in the room. I think you were there too. And
Yes,
how
barely made it. Yeah.
to be there, right? For that. I mean, I could hardly believe it. So yeah, I'm very happy with the way it's gone. Of course, there's always pushback. There was that one reporter who focused on the fact that Dave Grusch had PTSD as if that was something bad.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's not. He was completely treated for it, and any veteran who goes through trauma is going to have PTSD. It's completely common. They obviously tried to use it as a way of denigrating him. It didn't work. It did not work at all.
I think most of us have PTSD on our. I have it. It's listed. Yeah. I mean,
yeah, especially people who are in combat situations or went through what David went through. I mean, I feel like it's in a way it's heroic for someone to have PTSD because it means they've done something to serve their country that was a very heroic and traumatic thing for them to do. Whatever it was that happened to them, they should be honored for it. So it just seemed like that whole article backfired. And there really isn't dirt that you can dig up on David Grusch. He's absolutely credible. He was highly respected within the intelligence community. That's why so many people were willing to talk to him and share the information that they did. Obviously, they've tried and they haven't come up with anything. And I'm not at all surprised. He's absolutely brilliant and just highly credible person. And that's why he was able to bring forward this information at the level that he did. That's why the story is so important. It's not like someone on their deathbed, who has a story to tell about Roswell, right? This is a completely different level here. I consider this to be as important as the 2017 story in terms of the David Grusch story. I think it's just as significant and just as much of a turning point. It's just meeting with more resistance because it's asking a lot more of people to accept that there could be these programs with crash retrieved objects. And we do need more investigation to be done to bring out more information about it. But just the fact that that topic is being brought forward and that it was part of a congressional hearing and that it has been, information about it has been submitted to the ICIG, the Intelligence Community Inspector General, is very, very significant, in my opinion.
How confident were you that he was going to testify? Did you know he was planning on it?
Yeah, I mean, I think as long as he was asked to testify, he was going to testify. I had no doubt about that. And I do remember knowing ahead of time. I think it took them a while to ask him because it took them a while to get the date and to get everything rolling. It was all kind of, and then it was kind of fast, the whole thing. But I knew that he would if he was asked to. Absolutely. Yeah.
And yeah, he's just been such an amazing example of how to do it correctly. And he's taking so many spears and his demeanor has been so excellent throughout the whole thing. I'm very happy with David Grusch's, at least his UAP hearing and his exclusive interviews have been excellent, I think.
I agree with you. Yeah.
Do you have any background secret information that you'd be willing to reveal about any future, hearings or anything coming?
I really don't have anything secret. I mean, I am, except there are other whistleblowers that I'm familiar with, and some of them I talk to that I cannot name. But I think there will be others coming forward. And of course, we all know that others have already talked to members of Congress. They're just, they're very hesitant about coming forward. I think they wanted to see how everything played out with David Grusch. But I'm convinced that more will come forward. And in terms of other hearings, I don't have any inside information, but I think Representative Luna just posted yesterday on Twitter that they are going to be doing another hearing in the House. I don't know which committee. I don't know anything about it, but she said something about them trying to get a date for another hearing. So that's fantastic. I don't know who the
Excellent.
witnesses would be. I don't know anything about it. It would be great if they could get a committee that has subpoena power, and so that certain people could be brought in, whether they want to come in or not, So I don't know what they have planned. I don't know, but it's moving forward, and I just find every step of the way that it's exciting. Even the NASA hearing and the NASA press conference and report. I mean, even though people are always, want more, just the fact that NASA is engaged with this topic to me is just very significant. And I'm not going to complain about how conservative they are. I just think the fact that they're engaged should be commended. They should be encouraged and not criticized. And the fact that they mentioned that some of their committee members have been harassed on social media or even threatened is just unconscionable. I just can't believe how anyone would think that's going to help move us towards disclosure if that's what people want. Maybe the people doing this don't want that, and that's why they do it. I don't know. I mean, I know it's a messy world out there, and I'm not on Twitter very often, so I don't even know a lot of the nasty things that go
was
on.
it coming from the UFO community, I guess? Was it us, hammering the NASA people, or was it from someone else?
I have no idea, so I'm not going to assume anything. But they did mention that at the hearing.
Yeah.
And I was just so who knows? Maybe it's operatives that want to try to bring things down that are doing this. I have no idea who it is, but it's so unfortunate. And so we just have to keep pressing forward, and and I'm happy that they're involved. What can I say? And I think it'll only get better now that they have this new person appointed to head up a UAP research group there, and they've made the name public. So let's see what happens with the NASA. Because they're not using any classified information for their studies, at least that's what they say, because they want to make everything transparent, which is commendable. It's questioned how far they're going to get without access to classified information, but I think they're just focused on developing means in which data can be studied and what is the best way for NASA to go about it. And that's all positive as far as I see it.
Yeah, I covered that actually, the NASA hearing on my channel. So if people want to check that out, they can. I tend to agree with you that at least they're talking about it. Obviously I wish there was more, that they had more data to present. There wasn't that much, but at least they're talking about it and they're getting the information out there and they're standing up there. James Fox asked a question at the hearing. He asked, I think he was the first one in line, and asked Bill Nelson. He asked if they have a plan. Does NASA have a plan to let the public know if they find anything? And it's from the response kind of that Bill Nelson gave was, it didn't sound like they have a plan, but he promised that they would tell us. He promised that they would be transparent. And then the next two questions, they said they won't tell. They can't tell. It was the budget and who they're going to make the director. But
I know that was sort of,
yeah.
But then the next day they did come out with the director's name, or maybe it was even later the same day. So at least they rethought it. Yeah. And the idea of a plan, I mean, if they are really being transparent and continuously releasing information, I don't know if they really need a plan. They just need to announce it if they find something. So I'm not quite sure what that question was about, because, one has to hope that this new director is going to be continuously providing information. Maybe they'll have a website. So anyway, maybe you don't need a plan. You just announce what you find. I don't know.
Yeah, I hope they announce with us, because before they said that they would press it, I think, to Arrow, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, who knows what's going to go on if something dramatic is discovered.
Speaking of dramatic, and I was much happier about it, I think, than I should have been, because I did not know these were previously analyzed, but also happened this week. So many things happened this week. You mentioned the NASA hearing. We had Grusch come out with a new interview, and then we had this. So the alien bodies presented in a Mexican Congress. So as a stunt, so called basically a stunt by Ryan Graves here. So he was there on the stage, and I guess I couldn't tell what if he was happy about it, but I guess he wasn't happy about it because after the actual release of these Nazca Peruvian mummies, essentially, right?
Yeah.
Jaime Maistan basically said that these are genetically non-humans. They've been tested over the period of a few years and it was released. I thought it was new information, but obviously it wasn't. So what is your general impression, I know, on this?
And
What's your
also,
take
just
on
to
it?
mention, I did speak with Ryan, and he had absolutely no idea in advance that
Okay.
mummies were going to be presented. Absolutely no idea. I spoke to Ryan after this hearing because I was like so shocked that these mummies have been trotted out. And I just
Yeah.
wanted to know, since he had been there, it was before he made that post on Twitter. I just
Okay.
wanted to know his take on it. And he basically said that he had no idea these things were going to happen. He knew nothing about it in advance, which,
Yeah.
not to tell the rest of the people coming that something like this was going to happen is weird in itself, but I bet a lot of the others may not have shown up if they'd known this was going to be trotted out there. So it was just kind of a disaster, the whole thing. The thing about these mummies is because I've been approached about these mummies over the years and I've looked into them and I find them fascinating. But the problem is there has not been enough scientific study on these mummies yet to make any kind of definitive determination as to their origin, whether they're human or non-human. There just needs to be a lot more work done on them. And some of them apparently have been determined to have some animal bones in them. And, some of them are questionable, but there's a lot of them. And so the only way we're really ever going to know is you have to have an international effort from a lot of different labs. You have to have all the data made public. It has to be peer reviewed in papers and published in journals. And there has to be an extensive long-term study on these mummies before any determination can be made. And that just hasn't been done yet. So I don't think it was appropriate for them to be brought out and for claims to be made that these are definitely non-human. It's just not the case. We don't know that yet. I also understand it, Chris, that this was not actually a congressional hearing at the same way that our hearing was here in America in July, and that the people who were sworn in were just kind of doing that as a ritual as opposed to it really meaning anything. That was my understanding also about this hearing. I'm not exactly clear who the authorities were that allowed these mummies to be brought in, but my understanding is they're not the equivalent to members of Congress in the United States. But I don't know that much about it. So this came out, and then we moved right into NASA. So I think this sort of slipped into the background, which I'm pleased about. I think the NASA situation is more important, obviously.
And I thought it was interesting. I think it was the News Nation rep asked about what was NASA's take on this.
BBC News Digital. We've been talking a lot about shift from sensationalism to science today. Has NASA been in touch with the Mexican authorities about the rather sensational revelations earlier this week of 2 allegedly non-human corpses? And what, if any, importance do you attach to these discoveries?
I think David had to prep for that one.
Well, this is something that I know I've only seen on Twitter. So it's, when we have unusual things, you want to make data public. I think of this as like NASA has one of the most valuable samples from outer space, lunar rocks. What do? We make them available to any scientists who want to work on this. We don't know the nature of those samples that were shown in front of them. If I was the Mexican government, I would are making recommendations to the Mexican government. That's not our charge here. We're doing this for NASA. My recommendation was, if you have something strange, make samples available to the world scientific community, and we'll see what's there.
My own personal view is this would be a great opportunity for them to practice what they would preach. What if someone did say, or like they just did here, that, hey, we found alien material in X country, in this case, Mexico. What would we do? It seems like, why not practice that and put out the samples for international analysis? And now if David Spergel and them at NASA now they can actually go and look at it.
Yeah, that
from
would
it.
be great. I mean, as long as they have biologists on their team and people qualified to do that kind of study, it doesn't seem like it's a very typical thing for NASA to do, since NASA's focused on space.
Yeah.
But somebody, and
Yeah.
it takes a lot of time and money to do it. That's the thing. So whether those resources can be provided to a proper study of this, I don't know, but it would be great if they could.
Well, I think NASA's one of their goals, right, is to actually find evidence of alien life, right? I think that's actually one of their
Right.
mission statements.
They're just not used
So
to
it
looking
seems like,
for Earth. They're
yeah, they
used to-
should be able to analyze and identify if something's alien or not. That
Yeah.
how can we trust them if they can't analyze something here on Earth is not alien? I don't know.
Yeah, no, I
Seems
get
like-
your point. We'll see what they do. It'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, and just to finish here, I'd like to just show Ryan Graves his tweet on it. So after the U.S. congressional hearing, UFO hearing, I accepted an invitation to testify before the Mexican Congress, hoping to keep up the momentum of government interest in pilot experiences with UAP. Unfortunately, yesterday's demonstration was a huge step backwards for this issue. My testimony centered on sharing my experience and the UAP reports I hear from commercial and military aircrew through ASA's Witness program. I will continue to raise awareness of UAP as an urgent matter of aerospace safety, national security, and science, but I'm deeply disappointed by this unsubstantiated stunt. So I think that's where the stunt comes from.
Right.
And yeah, I guess the negative is that it takes away from Ryan Graves' speech there. His Americans for Safe Aerospace, he mentioned that in that hearing that they have over 10,000 members now. And so he's trying to set up a global, well, I guess it could start in America at least first. And then hopefully we get a global aviation reporting mechanism, something to report UAPs for pilots. Because I do get videos still from pilots, commercial pilots, but they don't want to share their identity. They're like, here, hey, Chris, here's a video I have. It's these lights in the distance, and seeing it looked definitely anomalous. And here's the video. But I don't want to give away my identity. And
Right.
you kind of mentioned time there. So I could go and look into this case and identify him and go into more data, but I can't share that information, because if I share the data of where the plane was exactly at that time,
Mhm.
that gives away his airline, gives away his flight,
Right.
his airline, and then they'll be able to track down to his airline. And the issue is these pilots don't want their airlines knowing that they're sharing these. So it's kind of like I'm hitting a roadblock that Ryan Graves is kind of punching through, hopefully.
Hopefully. I mean, there's no reason why commercial pilots should not be able to report events and why their airlines should not be made public. I mean, there's still such a stigma there, and I guess Ryan is definitely helping to alleviate that. But I'm in the same situation where if people come to me, which they do a lot, who won't go on the record, I find the stories interesting, but I have limited amount of time that I can spend on stories that I can't bring forward, so it's always a dilemma to know how much time to spend on different things. And we still have a stigma, there's no doubt about it, but it's changing. It really is.
Yeah, I
So.
guess that was my next question was, you said it was very difficult at the very beginning, to get anything published at all. And then now it seems like it's changed drastically. Do you think that'll continue to change? Where do you see this going next year? Where do you see this movement happening? Or in 12 months, where do you see the UFO movement?
Oh gosh, it's hard to say. I mean, I would hope in 12 months that we would have had more hearings in Congress. Maybe some other whistleblowers will have come forward. I mean, to me, that's the key. To break through this crash retrieval thing, first of all, we need Congress to do an investigation into all the information they've been provided by Dave Grusch and others. I mean, they have the information. They have the specifics.
Don't they have it? Because the IGIC, right, the Inspector General, who's supposed to protect whistleblowers and root out corruption, he was briefed over a year ago, right? Wasn't he briefed a year ago on all this information? I mean, don't they have all the information? I guess I just assume that once they had all the information, there would be, I don't know, the FBI rolling out or some sort of agencies arresting people, or that something would happen. And then after this last hearing in 26 July, it was amazing. But I come to find out that no, he's already briefed everybody like years ago. You know, he's already been in a skiff with Congress people.
Right, but not all of them. So he has briefed a number of staffers, and there are certain, as I understand it, there are certain staffers who do not have the level of clearance needed to even be exposed to some of his information. But,
Without a doubt.
you know, it was originally provided to these staffers, and I don't know how many if all the members of Congress that we know who are interested in this have had access to it or read it. But it seems to me like that's the key, is for them to try and follow up on the information provided by Dave and others. But it's not an easy thing to do, you know, to knock on the doors of these places. A lot of these aerospace companies or other kinds of companies who have been contracted by the government to hold some of these materials, it's not that easy to approach a private corporation and expect them to just give something to you. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of legal issues that are going to come up, but I have not heard anything about an investigation being underway. And certainly the ICIG is not doing it, because it's really not their job to do the investigation. It's just their job to take the complaint and rule on it by the person involved, the person who has been harassed or retaliated against. I mean, that's the function of the ICIG. It's not to do a deep dive investigation. It's the function of the Congress to do that. And Arrow as well. Arrow is obviously not interested in the crash retrieval element of this topic, even though I know for a fact that certain people have briefed the Arrow director on some of this stuff. So I feel like it's up to Congress, and I think they're doing what they can, but it seems like a slow process. And I think the more that comes out, the more whistleblowers who come forward, it'll help motivate Congress. It'll help push them to keep doing more and to try to find out and get to the bottom of some of the information that they have to try to verify it.
That does make sense. You know, I guess who would investigate this is kind of the question. If who would investigate the government? It sounds like the military industrial complex. And it seems like it would have to be Congress, like you mentioned. Do they have congressional investigators? I just don't even know.
I'm not clear. I think every situation is different. I mean, you know, if they could set up a committee that had subpoena power, which they were talking about doing at one point, and perhaps they could take action that way. I'm really not sure. And then, of course, the Schumer legislation, which should help increase transparency a lot, but that's not really the same kind of thing we're talking about. So all of this is you know, talking about the next year. I mean, we're going to see all of this get clarified, I hope, over the next year. And hopefully we're going to see more information come out, even though the more that happens, the more pushback happens at the same time. And I think we're seeing some of that now, but I have faith that we're going to keep moving forward. And it's too late for this genie to go back in the bottle, as they say. And I think we'll see a lot
out of the bag, right?
Yeah. What's that?
The cat's out of the bag. We can't put this cat.
The train has left the station and it's not going back. So we just have to be patient. But I think a lot more is going to happen this year, in the next year.
I guess this picture is behind you. Is that somewhere in your office?
It really is. I don't know. No, it's actually, I moved it to another room. It's in a different room now, but it's in my house. It's in my apartment. I love that picture.
You mentioned you were looking into another case on Stephenville, and you found additional evidence. I interviewed Gary Hesseltine 2 days ago, and he just wrote an exhaustive book on Rendlesham, where he investigated Rendlesham. And he mentioned that he also found new witnesses, a lot of new evidence. You know, do you think we'll find just more and more evidence on these older cases to break through? Or do you think we'll need some new mass sighting event, you know, like a Phoenix Lights will all be ready? Or do you think we can get there from where we are now?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about the old cases. I mean, if, you know, I doubt that getting more witnesses on a case like Rendlesham is really going to change anything, although it's fascinating. It's a good thing to do. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure we all fantasize about if there is another mass event like a Phoenix Lights today, with everybody with their cell phone cameras, with the media eager to cover these things, with a DOD office now that's tasked to investigate cases. I mean, it would be so different than it was in 1997. So that's really, whether the phenomenon is going to display itself or not is beyond our control, obviously. And maybe if the phenomenon does not want to reveal itself to that extent, that might be why we're not going to have an event like that anymore. I don't know, but obviously a mass event like that would really change things, because it would be so well documented today that it would probably be undeniable, the way, the government has tried to deny some of these other cases, like the O'Hare incident and the Phoenix Lights and even the Hudson Valley wave and even Stephenville, So it would be fantastic if that would happen, but it's not up to us, of course. But I think that would be way more valuable than looking at old cases again. Obviously, I'm sure we all would agree about that.
So getting new data. And Martin Willis, he was actually right underneath the Chinese balloon shoot down. I don't know if you knew that. When it actually happened, he was underneath and got a video on his phone. So that,
wow.
We both know someone who videoed the Chinese shoot down. And I guess we know more people specifically in the UFO area, but that just as one example, that it should come out. Hopefully it comes out. And I wanted to move on just as the last part here onto surviving death. I read this book, and it took me a while to read the book. I just read it a few weeks ago, really because I was kind of waiting for the ontological shock to wear off from the UFO book, your first book, essentially.
Uh-huh.
But now we have the surviving death. And I remember in our first interview, we were talking about if you think it's related, if you think these afterlife or paranormal events related to surviving death, if you thought it was related to UAPs. And you said you basically, what I understood is you had a hunch it was, your intuition stated it was. Has that changed? Or, do you believe more now that it's related? What is your take on the relationship between that and UFOs?
I probably do believe more that they're related, but I don't have data to talk about to prove that. I think it's more from listening to people like Colm Kelleher when he talks about the events at Skinwalker Ranch, or Whitley Strieber, who has done such a deep dive into the world of experiencers and how that relates to the issues of the afterlife. Jeffrey Kripal is another one from Rice University who thinks about these questions a lot. So I don't know if we have a hard and fast answer, but certainly the more paranormal elements of the UFO phenomenon seem to have some relationship to what people describe in near-death experiences and other types of activities that take place in terms of just consciousness-related anomalous experiences that people have, which are very varied. There just is some kind of crossover there. And I don't know what it is. I mean, there is the whole component of UFOs, which is just purely physical. They're on radar, the way the military approaches them. But then there's another level of the UFO phenomenon that's way more paranormal, mysterious, complicated. Its impact on people is a very important element. Its medical effects, all of that, I think, ties in with issues related to near-death experiences and other types of afterlife experiences. So it's a big mystery how it all holds together. And it may have something to do with some kind of dimension in which all these things dwell. That's not our dimension that's perceived by our five senses, but some other type of dimension that may overlap in some way. I mean, that's just a possible scenario, very superficial. And so I don't have the answer, but I think it's a fascinating question. And it's something I'm trying to learn more about as much as I can.
Do you see our views changing? You basically wrote this book, right? UFOs in 2010. And then this one, I think, was this 2017? 2017. Okay, so does that mean we have about 7 years till we start seeing the afterlife change or come more into the mainstream views? I watch a lot of these NDE shows. We were just talking about Dan here, and I think it was such a great story. I'd like to bring him on if you're comfortable with that. If I could bring Dan on, just because it relates to your book. You have a lot of stuff in your book that you relate about actually mediumship and things I never thought could be possible, right? But think about both your books is you provide the evidence, saying, look, here's the evidence for this being a possibility. And now
exactly.
it's
And there
kind
are
of on them to go and look.
very sophisticated people who have studied this. I mean, those are the people I bring into my book, medical doctors, and a lot of medical doctors who are very, very advanced in their fields, cardiologists who have taken on these studies. So they're worth paying attention to. And Dan's story is so typical of so many people who have these experiences. So I think it's really great to hear it.
We were just talking about it, and I wanted to bring you on, Dan. Hopefully,
no, that's fine, mate. Yeah, that's
go ahead.
fine.
Yeah, what were you telling us right before we?
Yeah, so a friend of mine, he's 71 years old. I see him up the gym all the time. Complete atheist, and he went on holiday about a month or two ago. I don't exactly know what happened, but he got a kidney infection, got rushed into hospital. He actually died he got told when he woke back up that he died for 11 minutes or 11 or 12 minutes. And the first thing he said to the nurse when he came round was that I saw my mum and she told me, Brian, it's not your time yet. You've got to go back.
Get to work, go to school.
Yeah. He said, it's not your time yet. You've got to go back. He said, and he was 100% sure that he'd see her. He said he 100% believes now. His life's totally turned around. He stopped drinking now. He hasn't drunk now for about 5 or 6 weeks. And he's kind of changing into a different person now because of it. He just believes everything. Like, he's gone through 71 years of his life not believing that there's anything there, and then this one event has literally just flipped him into thinking or knowing that something's there. Because I watch the NDEs all the time, and when he spoke to me about it, I was like, you wouldn't believe how many NDE stories I watch, and like, this is just a typical example of an NDE story.
It's so profound, and it is, as you said, they know. It's not like, oh, I had some kind of dream or something. They actually experience themselves in a different reality, and it's so different than a dream. And they are there's no question that they were in that place when they wake up, and that's why it's so transformational. People's lives are radically changed, and as you say, they are aware that when they die, they are going back to this place. They're not going to be, fully dead.
He's a total changed person.
It changes your life.
He's changed your life.
It's really a great story. Yep.
And you have many examples like that. And my wife's also reading the book now, and she really likes it at the beginning, all your examples where that you can actually prove. It sounds like if we just keep looking, that we may actually have evidence, of an afterlife. And personally, that's all I've been looking for, and all the things from religion. I just wanted more evidence, it's just like, okay, just show me something more. And so it's a very exciting book and very difficult topic, if you will, very controversial topic to approach both of these, when you're looking at UFOs and surviving death. So I just want to say it's very courageous of you to do it and go out there and speak these things that are difficult to say. And especially in surviving death, you have, personal details with your brother, this relationship of your past brother, I thought was very interesting and very touching. So I recommend everyone check out both of these books.
Well, thank you. And it was a hard book to write. It felt much riskier than my UFO book, and it was much more personal because I included my own journey in that book. So, and it's dealing with things that are much less provable than UFOs, right? They don't have the same level of data, but I tried to approach it anyway with the same kind of rigor and that I would approach any kind of story as a journalist. That's what I'm interested in, is what the most evidential information is and data is regarding this question of an afterlife. And you can draw from so many different fields to address it, such as, reincarnation is another one. Near-death experiences, mediumship, a lot of different things. When you put it all together, it's highly suggestive that we're not just going to vanish when we die, that we do continue on, but we can't prove it. Whereas I think UFOs are more provable. There's no question they exist. So it was, and I did feel like I was taking a risk by writing that book, but it hasn't been a problem for me. So I'm glad about that. And also for people who are interested, it was made into a series on Netflix. It was a series based on my book, even though a lot of the information in that series is not from the book. There's a lot of additional information. It sort of has it's a style that's a little different than the book. It's more about the journeys of people dealing with this question, but it's really, really worth seeing. It's called Surviving Death, and it's on Netflix. And the whole first episode is about near-death experiences. And I think that's one of the best ones in the series. So those stories are just amazing. And the stories in that episode 1 were not in my book. So it's a great supplemental thing to watch. Yeah.
Okay, I haven't gone back and watched. Now that I've read your book, I haven't watched the Surviving Death series again. You know, I've watched several episodes, but I know my sister, for instance, she hadn't read the book, but she had seen the Netflix. So I think a lot of people have seen that Netflix show.
I mean, personally, I feel like the book has a lot more information in it. It's a lot more evidential than what they showed in the series. I didn't have complete control over what the content of that series was. So I would hope that people don't watch it instead of reading the book, just because the book is way more comprehensive. I'm sure, I don't know if you remember the series that well, but if you want to really be convinced about the evidence, I think the book gives a really thorough picture of that in a way that the series doesn't. But the series is very interesting also.
Here's a question specific about Surviving Death there. Has your perspective changed on a potential relationship between paranormal phenomena like mediumship and UAPs? Do you see a connection that merits further research?
Well, that's the question we were talking about a few minutes ago. I mean, yes, I feel like I'm getting a better sense of the connection, but I don't have the answers. And I do think further research would be fantastic. I mean, there are some kind of forces at play here. When you can sit in a room and watch objects levitate before your eyes, which I've done many times, there's got to be a physics, there's got to be a scientific explanation of what is going on to make that happen. And I wish that more scientists were curious about this. I mean, this is actually happening. And I think the scientific community just sort of dismisses it. They don't really believe that it happens, but it does. Or studies in telepathy, which of course are happening at IONS with Dean Radin is one of the leading investigators of telepathy. And I've certainly, that's a lot of what goes on in mediumship. The question is, where is the information coming from? But it's some form of telepathy. So yeah, it definitely merits further research. I wish more scientists would become involved and try to explain to us, given what we know about the brain and given what we know about the physics of the physical world and objects in it, how can we explain that these things actually occur? Because they do. And so far, I think that the approach has been to deny that they occur, but they do. I've seen them, and so have many others. So where is that curiosity? That's what I'd like to know.
Excellent. I've had Dean Radin on this show. I actually interviewed him last year as well. Yeah. And I looked at his data and it seems like they just don't believe the data is incorrect. I feel like they treat it like the Nazca mummies, you know, is kind of what the impression I get.
That it's just not worth studying.
Yeah, that's the impression I get, is that it's not worth studying. You know, they think that it's like this, you know, they think it's the alien bodies presented in the Mexican Congress, you know, that it's a stunt. And so why investigate it? I think maybe that's it. And that's what I believed, you know, before a few years ago.
Dean does have hard data though, which we don't, well, the mummies, there's some data on the mummies too. I don't know what to make of it. I mean, I think Dean's work is very kind of laboratory oriented, as I understand it. So you get data of small, like precognitive events that happen seconds before and things like that. But there's a whole macro world of psychokinesis and telepathy that occurs outside of the lab, which would be very hard to kind of repeat in a lab, you know? And that's what's so interesting to me. I mean, philosopher Stephen Browdy has written a lot about this, and I really recommend his books to people about all these macro events that occur and how do you explain them. And you really cannot bring like a physical medium into a lab and expect him to be able to repeat these events over and over again in that kind of a setting. It just doesn't happen. So it makes them very difficult to study. And they were studied historically by scientists who were actually invited to work with these physical mediums. And I do write about that in my book. I mean, to me, that's one of the most astonishing aspects of all of this, the work that I did for that book, is the physical mediumship. And people think it's baloney, but it's not in every case. There were many phonies, But there were outstanding Nobel Prize winning scientists who studied some of these mediums and documented what they were doing in very, very interesting ways. So that's just not happening now, but it has happened. And I wish it could happen now. We don't have as many physical mediums practicing as we did in the heyday of mediumship. And the one that I work with, who I write about in my book, is not interested in having scientists kind of take over his weekly experiences with his circle that he works with. So it's a difficult thing to study, but I think if scientists could come forward with some curiosity and some respect for the fact that these things actually occur, that would be a first step. And so far that hasn't happened. In contemporary times, it has happened historically.
And why do you think why did it tend to have a spike, I guess, in the heyday of mediumship, but then it's decreased, is it the stigma? Is it related to that, or is it cultural? Why do you think it hasn't continued?
Well, it's a good question. There was a lot of interest in this around in the 20s and 30s. There were 2 world wars happening. A lot of people were dying in those days. And there were scientists who took a great interest in this. And then, I don't know, as we moved into even a more hardcore scientific approach to things, for one thing, there weren't as many mediums. And some of the mediums were absolutely devastated by the way they were treated. There were some incidences of great disrespect for some of these mediums as well, and a lot of them retreated. But there just aren't as many physical mediums practicing now as there used to be, at least ones that are willing to be public. Because yes, there is an intense stigma against this stuff. It's way worse than UFOs.
Really?
Oh,
Wow.
yeah, absolutely. Who would believe that, materializations can occur in a dark room? Who believes that? Until you see it with your own eyes, you're not going to believe it. So I think it's much harder to accept that than to accept, the Navy showing you a video and telling you it's something they can't explain. It's hard data. So it's just, I think whatever many of the mediums practicing today or practicing physical mediumship probably are doing it privately. They're not making their work public. There have been others who have been caught cheating, which of course makes it much harder for the genuine mediums to be respected, because when somebody is caught cheating, it kind of, people say, well, that's because all of it's bogus. So that will tend to make the genuine mediums not want to be public, because they're going to be painted with the same brush. So it's complicated, but it's just not happening in the way that it was in the past. Yeah.
It seems like now we would have better systems, better experiments, who'd be able to model better, more accurate experiments. Maybe we have better night vision devices. It seems like all of these things should be looked into. I don't know.
Exactly. We just need the right people to come forward who are interested in doing it. And then we need a medium who's willing to work with the scientists. And it hasn't been easy. It wasn't easy for the ones in the early days in the 20s and 30s and 40s to work with scientists. Some of them were willing to do it, and they did it very rigorously, but it was difficult for them. And they were put through a great deal. And the scientists always kept upping the ante. They'd do one experiment and then they'd want to do another one, and then they want to get more and more rigorous and more rigorous. And it was difficult. And then some of them were falsely accused of hoaxing. It was just very messy. This is a type of phenomena that occur in these seance rooms are not something that people can easily accept as being real, and it's understandable. So the harder it is to accept, the more intense the scrutiny and the scientists are going to be about studying them. And it's difficult for the phenomena to occur if the energy in the room is not conducive to them manifesting. And that's another problem. When you get skeptical scientists in an environment like that, it can impact the ability of the phenomena to occur. It's a very complicated situation, but one I'm extremely interested in, having experienced it myself. Yeah,
exactly. That's the thing is, you mentioned, and you write in the book, and obviously it comes across about your shock, the personal shock I think you feel when you're seeing these events, and you relate in the book how there's no way that this could have happened. Essentially it's impossible. There's no way that that person, the medium, could have had that information essentially.
Oh, you're talking about the mental mediums.
Oh,
Yeah, when they bring through information, exactly. They'll tell you things that they couldn't possibly have known. And that's different from the physical phenomena that I'm talking about, but mental mediumship also. And I think people should know that the Bigelow Institute for Consciousness Studies, BICS, which was founded by Robert Bigelow, they are doing investigations into all of these questions. If you were saying earlier, Chris, about wanting more evidence for the reality, if you want to look at it, call it a reality of life after death, which of course I tried to do a kind of basic primer of that in my book, but BICS has done an extensive study of this, and they did a contest for the best essays on this topic of what is the best evidence for the survival of consciousness past bodily death. And that was, I believe it was in 21, 22. And I was one of 6 judges who worked for the organization to read all these essays that were submitted from all over the world, because Robert Bigelow was offering huge cash prizes for the winners of this contest. So there was a lot of motivation. And there were some amazing essays that were submitted, which provided fascinating evidence. And so I would encourage people who want more evidence to go to the BICS website and Bigelow Institute for Consciousness Studies and read some of those papers, because they're really, really, really good. And there's a lot of them on near-death experiences and other aspects of this question. So I just wanted to mention that.
Excellent. Yeah, I think Jeffrey Mishlove won that, I believe.
He did, and that's exactly right. He wrote
Oh, cool.
a really interesting, very comprehensive essay. They were long essays. They were 25,000 words each, and we had to read over 200 of them in a very short time. But it was a fascinating experience to interact with the other judges, who were incredible, and talk about all of this and agree on, who were going to be the winners. And it was very hard because there were so many good essays. But Jeffrey Mishloff's essay was really interesting, and it was embedded with videos. It's very easy to read and very comprehensive, which is one of the reasons why we selected it. It was so accessible. And yeah, so if you go to that website, you can read it and some of the other ones.
Yeah, I've read his. I haven't read any of the other ones though, but that's a good point. I didn't know you were a judge on that, and there's so many other good papers to read.
Absolutely. It was really, really interesting. So I think that's some of the more cutting edge information really that I can think of that's out there now, because these were really, really good researchers who wrote these papers.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I'll definitely check that out. And I believe Bigelow was just on his show. He's done a few.
Show, yeah.
Yeah, thinking aloud. I watch his show quite a lot, actually. I'm a fan of Jeffrey Mishlove as well. I would love to have him on the show. Actually, we can discuss that.
I bet he'd come on with you, Chris. Yeah, he's a really well-informed individual about on these topics, having been interviewing people for decades, literally, about all the paranormal topics and that there are. So he's really well-informed. Yeah, he'd be a great guest for you.
And it definitely seems to cross those 2 boundaries, right? The UFOs seems to be related to some new science, coming out about consciousness, or, what is this experience that we're all going through right now? And somehow UFOs seem weirdly, intricately related. So
it has to do with consciousness, I think. I mean, there's an element of UFOs which is just physical. It's just physical data and it's objects or whatever, but there's a consciousness element as well. And that's where they seem to overlap. And it's not like the DOD has been documenting that the way they've been documenting other aspects of UFOs, but that doesn't mean that those elements are not out there. They are. And they were even referenced in legislation that we need to, some of the legislation that Gillibrand passed about wanting to get reports about mental health effects, physical health effects, those kinds of things that really have to do with another level of paranormal experience. And all the people who have had encounters and how their consciousness has been affected, it does overlap. But I see it as, it's funny, when I wrote Surviving Death, I was not even thinking that there was any connection at all, because I've been so focused on UFOs as a physical phenomenon, and as something that Congress needs to pay attention to. Therefore, I'm going to present this very credible information that has to do with physical data. And when I wrote Surviving Death, I thought of it as something completely separate. And it was only afterwards when I listened to some of these great scholars and researchers who have experienced a lot more of the paranormal aspects of UFOs that I started to realize there is a connection, but I hadn't even thought about it before. So I'm kind of new to that. And it's still a mystery to me, but yeah, so that's kind of interesting. I was not thinking about it at all when I wrote Surviving Death. I thought of them as two completely different topics.
But they're both amazingly interesting. And I think when you research, at least in my research of UFOs, I've fallen into consciousness. Is there other elements? There's things my dog can sense that I can't sense. So there's obviously many things around us right now that we can't sense. Could there also be, afterlife, things there that we can't sense? And I don't know, it seems like it is related somehow with consciousness experiences, the experiencer phenomenon you mentioned. And I recommend anybody who really wants some ontological shock, who hasn't been in this for necessarily years, is read these two books. I would recommend Surviving Death, and then I read Them by Whitley Strieber. You mentioned Whitley Strieber, and I just read Them after reading Surviving Death. And yeah, again, his whole and that is a mind warp right there. I think that's the whole Monty, really. If you want to get into how far can this whole concept go, is surviving death somehow related to consciousness, somehow relating to them. I don't know.
I think that the book Them is really great. I recommend people read that. Really interesting book.
Well, excellent, Leslie. Thank you so much for your time on this Saturday. I know you're taking time out for this, and I appreciate all your work. I think I speak for thousands and thousands of people in my audience. Thank you for all you've done for UFOs and the community in general.
Well, thank you, Chris. It's always a pleasure to be on with you, and thanks for having me.
Amazing interview. We covered so much ground, went all the way from 2000 through 2010 to all the Fravor graves, and they now Grusch release inside information to Surviving Death. Is it related? Amazing stuff. Please smash that like button, really helps. Share and then subscribe. You can always get exclusive content, including my take on the F-35 crash on Patreon or YouTube member. Thanks for being here. Have a great day. Peace.